Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today and taking the time out of your busy schedule. Again, my name is Philip Raffi. I'm the Senior Director of Sustainability and Business Solutions from Peak Power. Peak Power is a software tech company located in Toronto, and we are really excited to be hosting this webinar today. The overall theme is, preparing for commercial real estate spaces and for a safe return for tenants back to the office, and really what that means and what that encompasses. And I think this is a topic that's been on everyone's minds in one way or another. There's been a lot of articles written about it lately. And do we focus more on the open air concept, indoor air quality, or we have a combination of some people working from home, some people returning to the office, a combination of both. There are a lot of strategies out there, and if you're like me, reading all the different opinions and different views can be confusing. So what we thought we would do today is invite all you here today, including both our panelists, who I'll let them introduce themselves in just a second, just to have a deep dive conversation and get some advice from leading industry experts. And yeah, I'd really like to welcome both Susan and Riley. Riley, why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction and let us know a little bit about yourself and the Kipling Group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the Peak Power team for having us on. As Phil has said, there's certainly a lot of literature flying around these days about the safe return to the workplace and what's going to be best in making that a safe and comfortable place for not only tenants of the buildings, but also for employees and guest visitors, you name it, to safely return to the workplace and to the office. I'm a senior property manager with Kipling Realty Management, or the Kipling Group. The Kipling Group is a multifaceted manager of several different types of properties, ranging from office, medical, industrial, retail. We touch clusters of retail and industrial sites as far out as Alberta, and look out for some pretty big spaces here in Toronto, including Union Station. I was very keen to get on the call today because, as Phil says, it's a topic that's generating a lot of buzz right now, and I want to do my part to assist in making sure everybody has the right information and taking the right tact when asking their employees to return to the workplace.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Riley. Again, thank you very much for being here. Susan, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Blanchet. I am the CEO of Origen Air. And after spending 15 years as a lawyer in airtight office space, as well as courthouses that might not always have the best air, I left 2.5 years ago to found Origen Air. So what is special about what we do is we use genetically enhanced plants. So that's kind of our secret sauce. These plants have been modified with an enzyme that's the same as an enzyme that you or I have in our liver, and it metabolizes toxins that cause cancer and other illnesses over time in tight air spaces. 80% of building air right now is not meeting minimal ASHRAE standards. During the pandemic, we pivoted to not only have the genetically enhanced plants that you see on the screen that remove 82 to 100% of volatile organic compounds as compared to regular plants, but we also added on a UVC filter. This is still in proof of concept, but we filed a patent on this. It hypothetically should remove coronavirus in one pass through our Sentinel unit. So we target commercial airspaces. We're a commercial air purifier, and we're currently completing proof of concept on our UVC filtration at UBC. So thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to discussing how we can make our indoor air safer inside commercial buildings.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, before I jump into a few open-ended questions, a few housekeeping items. First, so what we're going to do is, if you have any questions, please enter the questions in the text, the chat box, and then we'll review all the questions, and then we can ask them towards the end of the conversation. And yeah, so let's get right into it. Okay, I think we have a lot of good questions, a lot of things I want to cover. This topic is very broad and go in different ways. So first question, a little bit broad to kind of set the stage. And Susan, why don't we start with you? So, I mean, what sorts of challenges have you and your customers been seeing since the pandemic started? I know it's a very broad, open-ended question, but I mean, I'm just trying to understand a little bit about what, those phone calls that you get since COVID started. What has changed maybe before COVID, after COVID? You mentioned that you pivoted. So, were some of the requests that you were getting from your clients, was that a catalyst into the pivot? Or maybe tell us a little bit about that if you want.
Definitely. So we started with a target on invisible toxins such as benzene, acrolein, other off-gassing that happens from furniture, glues. People don't really understand what they're breathing in indoor spaces. So one of our, I would call it the Bible of indoor air, is a book called Healthy Buildings that comes out of Harvard, written by John D. Macomber and Joseph Allen. So this book is kind of what set us on our path to cleaning indoor air in buildings. We're now an indoor species. Like, humans used to live outside, but now we spend 90% of our time indoors. And our indoor air quality isn't measured except for a point in time based on ASHRAE standards to actually tell us what the indoor air quality in the building is. But we see this as changing with the outset of all of the air quality sensors that are hitting the market. And pretty soon people are going to know what they're breathing. Of course, the pandemic hit 18 months ago, and now people are very concerned with what they're breathing in indoor spaces and the invisible particles that they're breathing. So this caused us to pivot about a year ago and develop the UVC filtration. UVC is next level to X-ray technology. It's not safe for humans. It needs to be in a closed container so humans are not exposed to it. But what it does is denature pathogens and bacteria. So it can not only remove coronavirus and other pathogens, but it can also remove smells that aren't very wanted in indoor spaces. So that's how we pivoted based on not only our customers, but just the world as a whole, finally looking at indoor air quality the same way they looked at water quality in the 90s.
Interesting. No, that's, I mean, not knowing and not understanding what you're breathing in this space can be, especially now that, I think, it's starting to be a little bit more in the know, and people really want to understand what they're breathing and how to gauge what's good and what's bad. I think a lot of this is a large educational process. So, good on you for making that pivot and that change. And that's a beautiful product as well. So Riley, how about yourself? I mean, you deal with, your role's a little bit different. You're managing buildings, several buildings, and you have lots of tenants in those buildings. So, you're maybe facing it from both ends. You have, the tenants can be deemed as your clients, but then you really have the clients, perhaps the institutional owners or the managers of the building that you report to. So you're kind of in the middle, hearing things from both ends, which I think is a very interesting perspective. So please tell us, I mean, what are some of the challenges that you've been dealing with since the pandemic started?
It's a great question, Phil. And as you say, it depends on the building that we're talking about, minute to minute and hour by hour. If we've got tenants that are in a large industrial site with a small shared area of common element, they may have questions on how frequently are we doing preventative maintenance on those units to ensure that the air quality in the shared spaces is its best. What kind of preventative maintenance plan do we have for our own dedicated air handling units, coolers, chillers, what have you? There can be questions around the frequency of cleaning where janitorial is provided. There are questions around access. So for buildings with a shared common element that maybe have a retail component, how secure is the rest of the building to make sure if somebody comes in and wants a coffee, that they're not contributing to any kind of hazards or material spread, viruses or otherwise, inside of the property. So these are all things that you have to think about at the ownership level and decide, are we going to be adding in, key fob access points? Will there be an enhanced security patrol? Are we going to add additional cleaners to tackle things like high traffic touch points, light switches, door handles, handrails, elevator call buttons? The list goes on and on. So there are a number of things that you need to look at. And of course, for both the tenants and the owners, the cost is king. And we can't, at the end of the year, say, well, we wanted to make this place absolutely free of all types of viruses and other pathogens. And here's a big fat bill at the end of the year because we decided to replace absolutely everything. So you do have to work with what you've got and leverage experts such as Susan and our friends at Peak Power to look at what makes sense and what is doable in the time period that we have without ripping everything apart and building it again from the ground up. So there are a number of solutions that Kipling worked with industry experts to identify, and we've put some of those in place. There's kind of a start, stop, continue approach to this at this time in the pandemic, where there are some tasks that we implemented at first and didn't see a huge change in the building, and there's others that we thought might not be noticed, and the tenants and owners have absolutely loved to see them, and it adds that feeling of safety and security. We do like to do things you can touch and feel and see in real time, and some of those processes that happen behind the scene aren't always as well received. So it's a bit of a fine balance in showing the tenants and showing the guests that changes are happening to make them safe and secure, and also making sure that when the questions are asked, that you give them an answer, and if it's something that the tenant handles themselves, that you help to educate them on how they can do that better, and not just say lots of luck while you navigate these treacherous waters.
Wow, yeah, no, those are a lot of great points. I mean, you mentioned a few. I know I was reading a Forbes article about this, and they were saying that some of the main things are building entry control with mobile key cards, cloud-based security systems. The other one was new sanitization schedules. I mean, then there's IoT indoor air quality monitoring. There's so many different things, and it's so broad. Is there something, Riley, that's jumping out at you that has been a continued underlying request or underlying theme around something? I mean, has it been focused, have tenant requests been focusing more on indoor air quality and some sort of a monitoring system, or is it the smaller things like what are you doing to clean the bathrooms or clean surfaces that are most often touched, or because it's such a broad spectrum, right? You're going from an IoT Internet of Things technology solution that can continually detect your indoor air quality versus something as simple as just increasing sanitization schedules or preventative maintenance. So is there one that's kind of, that's been the underlying theme more often than others?
I would say for commercial workspaces, it's the enhanced janitorial scheduling and cleaning. The one that takes the most time to explain, of course, is the indoor air quality filter changes, preventative maintenance on air handling units. But again, because people can't really touch and feel that, it's a hard one to get them to say, oh, great, I'm satisfied with that. Where we found the majority of our tenant and guest satisfaction comes from is, seeing those high traffic touch points being cleaned, notices out to tenants that we've made changes from a commercial grade sanitary product to a hospital or medical grade sanitary product. And that includes the replacement of filters and things like air handling units. Again, they don't get to open up those machines and have a look at what we've changed out. But when they do see that they're going by, hourly, half hourly, checking elevator buttons, light switches, handrails, door switches, that's something that they can see in real time. And it does add that sort of additional comfort. I'm sure that as more folks kind of come back to the office and return to their workplaces, we're going to see an influx of those requests of when was the last preventative maintenance done? What did you do with the filters? Have any changes been made to the systems? Because those are questions that, as Susan has said, are kind of on the tip of everybody's tongue right now. And as we become more literate about our air quality, as a workforce, it's something that people are going to be asking their bosses. And this kind of thing trickles right into my lap. Whenever the employees are asking the question of the manager, then they'll turn to Riley and say, well, I'm not sure, and what information can you give me? So, certainly a mixed bag. I think that the indoor air quality and the janitorial are two pieces that are going to emerge at sort of the forefront of getting people to return to the office with confidence.
Okay, that's excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So one of the things I really heard there from you, Riley, was visualization is key. And that brings me right back to you, Susan, because your product is really all about visualization. So tell us a little bit, with the product and being so visual and people are seeing it, there are two things. One, how is that how is that portrayed from, a tenant level? I mean, what kind of feedback have you been getting from it? And then on the not so visual part, is there anything that you also do to show how, maybe behind the scenes, or what kind of effect that your product has on the things that people can't see?
Great question, Phil. And thanks, Riley, for setting it up. Basically, our machine, one thing I didn't mention is the digital bio billboard. That is a very prominent feature of the Sentinel unit. So it's meant to be in office spaces, like in the lobby, where people can see it. And it's as much an education tool as an air purifying machine, because we realize that we're dealing with an invisible problem that has very quickly become one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem facing the commercial real estate industry at this point. People are questioning what is in their air. So we can link in with an API, simple API, to any of the air sensors in the building, to the energy efficiency, other parts that the building owners have put into place, and we can showcase that in the lobby. So not only for air quality, but another really large issue in the commercial building space is energy efficiency, climate change, lowering our GHG emissions. So we can showcase what the building owners are doing to the public, to their clients, to their tenants, to really give them props on their environmental and social governance that they're bringing into the building. So that's one piece of it. But the air quality piece is another. Like right now, we're all sitting, alone. So when we're breathing in the air around us, but we're not breathing in other people's air. Just to take it back, I'm aging myself, but in the 70s, you're in a building, you would just open the window, right? And you'd have the fresh air coming in. Over the last 35 years, we've moved to these airtight buildings because the main focus of property managers and buildings was to make energy efficiency the number one. So over the last 30 years, buildings have become these closed aquariums of air. So you take a deep breath in an office space, 3% of the air you're breathing is coming out of other people's lungs. So that is where the pandemic really brings in the focus on how we have to clean up the indoor air quality and make it a safe space for people to return to. Of course, we are also met with the climate initiatives and also energy efficiency in our buildings. So to date, HVAC systems, HEPA filters have done a great job of removing many of the toxins that are coming into our building from outside, but they're only taking out about 40% of the volatile organic compounds. And now we're faced with this new problem indoors, which is what's coming out of other people's lungs. So with Origen Air's Sentinel, the key is to re-energize the buildings with oxygenated air that's been cleaned and processed. And we are doing it on a small scale to start, but then we're moving to a large HVAC integrated scale where we can remove more than just 40% of the toxins, but get that up to 82 to 100% to make it safe for people. But education is key. Like right now, we're just learning about indoor air quality, and under ASHRAE and under other standards, all we've had to meet to this day is a minimum standard. Well, I know I don't want to be breathing in a minimum standard of air. I want to be breathing in good air in a building. So by showcasing this on the Sentinel's bio billboard, people will start to learn what they're breathing. But more importantly, most of the air sensors that have been deployed, they're like the fire alarm. Okay, there's something wrong with air. How do we fix it? So we're hoping that we can move into that space and take it from a 40% reduction to an 82 to 100% reduction in poor indoor air quality, and make it good air for people to breathe, not just substandard or minimums. And we need to start talking about optimums. And by doing this with the HVAC, we can actually reduce the amount of GHG emissions that are being produced in buildings too. Because, and I'm sure Riley can speak to this better than I can, but for the last 30 years, as we make our buildings more airtight, the only way to bring in better air is ventilation, increasing ventilation. And to increase ventilation, you have to pull in more air from outside, and you need to heat it or cool it. And that's where the big cost and all the GHG emissions are coming from. So if we can bring in new innovative products to recirculate the air inside of a building and clean it, all of a sudden we can do both. We can improve indoor air quality and reduce the GHG emissions caused by heating and cooling new air from outside.
Wow, that was a lot of information. I love what you said there. 40% of the volatile organic compounds. And you can take that. So typically most of the filters, they're only doing about 40% of the work. And you can try with your solution, bring it up to 82%. Is that correct?
Yes. So in laboratory testing, our genetically enhanced plants removed 82 to 100% of the volatile organic compounds tested. So this was in comparison not to like a HEPA filter, but to regular plants. So that's another myth that we're trying to dispel at Origen Air. As much as plants like the living wall behind me are beautiful and biophilic design is important, just the same as kind of, I think in the last 20 years, you see the Googles and the large companies bringing in like foosball tables and social areas where people can hang out. That needs to change to bringing in air quality. Let's spend money where people are actually being healthier. I know we spoke earlier before we started about some of the articles coming out about how poor indoor air quality can actually, reduce cognitive function. So it's about making a space more productive, as well as, just improving the air for our long-term health. My background is law. I was a lawyer for 15 years. And part of the reason I left is any health-related litigation, it's just too hard to prove. There's too many variables. You can't prove duty of care and actually win a case. So instead, I decided to start a clean tech company where I could make a difference. And this is in producing good air, because over time, those volatile organic compounds are causing heart disease, dementia, asthma, autoimmune disorders, but people are reticent to react when it's not going to affect them for 25 years. But if it's something that's affecting them immediately, like the pandemic, all of a sudden people are waking up and paying attention to the invisible particles in our air that are making us sicker.
Wow. That's some fantastic information. Look, I think we all know healthy spaces really drive positive activity and productivity. That's something that, we've been studying about here at Peak and reading about. And I think that's something that's really, hopefully catching on. And I think you're right. I think one of the underlying issues that we don't realize is the long-term effects of what, our environment has that we don't know. And I'm really, it's unfortunate to say, but a lot of times, we're either too distracted or too busy to stop and think about it or ask the right questions. So, that leads and that puts a huge amount of responsibility on either solution providers like Peak Power or like Origen Air. And then on the other side, Riley, for yourself, it's, I think maybe even a harder task is filtering through all the solutions, all the possible things that you could be doing. You mentioned earlier, Riley, that, you have a preventative maintenance plan. You're redoing some of the internal policies, but then there's also that third-party integration, who you bring in. So, my question for you, Riley, is number one, do you start looking internally first before you bring in third party, or do you look at third-party solutions first, or do you do both? How have you sifted through the tens or hundreds of different solutions that you could have possibly implemented at your building, and why did you select the ones you selected? If I'm sure there's some people on the call who are like you, managing properties, and maybe they've had some traction, some headway, and maybe they're just starting off and trying to create some implementations or some solutions. So what's your advice to them? Where did you start off, and what made you do it?
As you say, Phil, no one envies the task of having to sift through all of the myriad solutions that are possible. What we started with is what we thought was achievable. and how we saw, what's your quickest path to getting a product or a service or an enhancement into these buildings that is going to make a difference. There's many nice words, and you can just wrap the building up in caution tape and say we're closed, but that doesn't really make the boat go faster, right? We want to allow our tenants and guests to utilize the spaces that they're paying for, or renting out, or coming in to enjoy a coffee or what have you. So what we did was we engaged a number of groups that we work with very closely, including consultants, including experts in their respective fields, and some general trades as well, to kind of come in and pitch to us what their solution is, how it works, and what kind of steps you're looking at to get it implemented into your commercial, retail, medical, or industrial space. And through going through some of those demos, you could kind of come up with a short list of, well, this sounds good and this is very interesting. So I can't recommend enough to, this is not the kind of solution that you can sit behind a desk and fully understand, unfortunately. There's lots in the property management world that we can kind of read through a couple of pages and go, okay, I can glean the rest of this. And this is not one of those. This is a touch it and feel it and get out to the buildings and see where your pain points are in real time. Talk to your building operators. They know the building very, very well, and they're an excellent, excellent resource for property managers to draw upon. They're in there hearing the feedback in real time. They're telling you how quickly some of these systems may be, having a bit of a moment where they need some extra repairs or attention. So that's a really great place to start. Looking at your building condition assessment and seeing what systems are base building original, what was on your list for replacement in the next 5 to 10 years, because it's at the end of its useful lifespan. End of its useful lifespan sounds pretty final, but as we all know, there are little adjustments and components that can be replaced to improve the lifespan of those products. But if at the core of whatever those systems are, they're not working, then just changing out a couple of filters and pulleys is not going to be sufficient. So that's when you have to drill down a little bit deeper and say, okay, I know we weren't planning on replacing this system, Mr. Landlord, until 2023, but given the fact we have an empty building and we have a major global pandemic on our hands, and by and large, most buildings have material savings due to a lot of the occupancy-driven, recoveries, like paper towel and other things like that. These things that just aren't being used because the buildings are so not vacant, but slow attendance coming back. You can sort of pivot some of your anticipated spends and address some of these things with the capital that you have available. So again, my advice to anybody who's just overwhelmed with where to start out, talk to some of the experts, talk to the trades you know and trust, engage your client, understand where their priorities are, get to the sites, look at it for yourself. Talk with your operators. They're going to give you a ton of information that you'll never be able to glean from a PDF report. And then see what you guys think works, what's achievable, what works within your timelines or your budget constraints. It's always better to start something than to just say, we'll wait till next year and see if everybody comes back. It's a time to be proactive and to start making some of those changes like Susan mentioned, not just to heat the minimum thresholds, but to start achieving really high quality air and making it a safe place to return and to continue to work.
You're on mute.
I knew that was going to happen at some point in this conversation, so I'm glad we got it over with. But okay, so those are fantastic points, Riley. Thank you. So just to summarize there, I think we heard that choose things that are achievable and that are results driven, something where you can actually see tangible results. Look at documentation such as building condition assessments, and I think that was a great point, by the way. Reallocate funds. This is the time to, we've heard the word pivot a couple of times. It's the time now to pivot. And, the environment is different. Literally, like, our environment, the work environment is different. We're trying to change the air quality, that kind of environment as well. So reallocate source of funds, create business plans, try and get things implemented that, you're not having to probably wait for budget approval for, or, speed things up from that point of view, which I love all those points. Now, okay, so let's jump ahead. Yeah.
One additional thing that I will mention very quickly for any property managers, you're probably like me in the throes of your budget season right now, which is always just a joy. And this is a great time. If there are things that you wanted to get across the line that you don't think the client had the appetite for in 2021 or 2022, this is the time to slot some of those into your forecast for 2023 and beyond, and at least have the discussion and gauge the appetite for something like that. It's a good time. And Phil, sorry, I just wanted to include that last point before we move on.
Nope, perfect. Thank you very much. That was a great final point. And then, yeah, as I was going to say, so maybe just jumping on, and I think this is a good question for you both again, but jumping on the opposite side. So we discussed a little bit about, grassroots, and if you don't have anything started, how to get things started, how to manifest things, especially if funds are tight, redistribute, reallocate funds, look where you're not spending as much as you thought you would in certain areas and redeploy that capital into something else. So let's say now, we've done that. We've deployed capital, we've made improvements, made changes. Once you've chosen a solution, and again, we can answer this question on both sides, which is really nice. But once a solution is chosen, how do we make sure it works? What are the follow-ups? What are the procedures, the questions? Because I come from commercial real estate, so I understand this as well, but it's a busy environment. You are always dealing with something new at all times. So typically when you make a decision and when something's implemented, I don't want to say it's, we made the decision and then we move on, but it's like, you always have to go back and make sure that the promises that were made are kept up, or that, if you had certain internal metrics that you thought that implementing a certain technology was going to provide, you want to go back and make sure that you met those numbers. And if you're above target, great. If you're below target, what's the gap? What did we miss? So what does that process look like for both? Susan, I think I'll start with yourself because, you're coming from the solution provider perspective, similar to Peak. What kind of metrics do you do, or what kind of metrics are your clients asking for, to prove or to show the efficiency of the overall product?
Yes, it's a great question, Phil. I think just following on what Riley said is the good news is that every building can improve. And the other part of it is we've seen New York move to 2050, all buildings will be net zero. Same thing has happened in Boston this week. This is a movement. It's not going to go away. There's air quality committees being formed in Canada to set regulations and set standards around indoor air. This is coming. Air sensor companies like Peak Power are going to be showing everyone what's going on inside the building. And the metrics, I agree, are key. So I found this out maybe the hard way a little bit. I don't have an engineering background or a HVAC background. I've got lots of very intelligent staff that work for me that are in this realm. But for us, it really came down to finding out the key metrics and then tying those to each of our units so that we can show what a unit is doing. And for anyone who's dived into, as I know Peak Power has, how to measure indoor air quality, it's not an easy walk in the park. It's quite difficult because you're measuring, at least with Origen Air, we're getting down to the parts per billion. So when I first started designing the Sentinel with my engineering team and looking at all the air quality sensors on the market, we can get down to PM parts per million, 2.5, which is like smoke from wildfires. And that's very easily measured to see what the difference is in a building. What we're measuring is down to the parts per billion. That is very difficult. Same with coronavirus, very difficult to measure in the field. So what we're doing to show metrics is we have built like an airtight chamber with our Sentinel inside of it, where we can syringe in levels of volatile organic compounds. So we can actually measure this with a gas chromatograph at a controlled environment. And then we'll be able to take these learnings and transfer them into what is happening in the field, because it is almost impossible to measure in the field at this time down to the parts per billion. But things are changing. much the same as, a simple carbon monoxide detector 10 years ago, no one could afford to have in their boardroom. Now for $200, you can have a CO2 detector sitting in your boardroom. And as soon as it hits 1,000, that's when the meeting ends, because there's a lot of literature proving that CO2 over 1,000 is just not good for our cognition. It's when you get, in the afternoon, when you need that extra coffee, when you need a sugar hit, that's likely because the CO2 is too high in your space. So I think metrics is key, and at least down to PM1, we're starting to get air sensors on the market. I know Peak Power has some that measure down to parts per million, which is hitting a lot of the smoke particles, which are a major detriment to cognition in the workplace. And I think that will just increase. And as we see over the next 3 or 4 years, I'm sure you're going to walk into a building, you're going to pull out your smartphone or look at your smartwatch, and you're going to know what you're breathing. So I think the metrics and showing the difference from when a new product is implemented from what it was before. So the air sensor companies are measuring the baselines, so we'll be able to see a change when the new products are implemented, which will be very important for Riley and all the property managers to make their jobs easier.
No, I completely agree. And based on what you said from needing the coffee, I should get CO2 tested in my basement. I always feel like I need a coffee. So no, great points. Riley, what about your perspective from the other side of the spectrum? What kind of standards or what kind of things are you looking for after systems implemented? And it doesn't have to be an IoT system like Peak's. It could be a different product like Susan's. Do you guys have a certain set procedure, or does that procedure a little bit more malleable based on the actual product implementation?
It really varies from site to site, Phil. I think, for a medical building like 1243 Islington, where I'm fortunate to get to work with Peak Power at that site, the metrics are tangible. I've got an operator there myself. I can access a dashboard and I can look at these reports in real time. We have an actual human being there who can make the adjustments. Of course, if something happens in the middle of the night, somebody might have to dash out there and turn a knob or two. But by and large, we're still utilizing the human component of some of these automated systems, and I can see us getting away from that with digital direct controls and full integration into an IoT or a web platform, so you can do it from the comfort of your living room on your smartphone. Is that something that every building is going to adopt? I can't imagine that it is, just based on their size or the age or what the long-term strategy is. Is it a development property, or is this just something that they're looking to sort of keep status quo and continue with leasing operations? I like to think that the majority of clients, not only for Kipling but in the industry at large, are going to start, making changes to the way these systems behave because of information like Susan is sharing with us, that people are going to be checking their smartphones and their watches and going, it's just too high for me to consider coming in today. I've got a kid at home who's not feeling well, and I don't want to go home feeling tired or not well or what have you. As these become more obvious to the average tenant or guest or someone who's popping in just to go and have a meeting with somebody, similar to what Susan was saying about water quality testing, it's going to be front of mind for people. And if you don't start making, at least a rough on the back of a napkin plan now for how you're going to meet those targets or keep those people engaged, then you're already a step behind. So, we have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best a lot in the commercial real estate industry. And being knowledgeable about these new solutions that are coming is what webinars like this are all about. And coming on and hearing about new technology that you may not have heard of before. It's great for the next meeting with the client. It's great for the next meeting with that tenant who calls you every week and says, well, what are you looking at now? You've got to keep yourself knowledgeable, and ultimately, if things aren't working, you got to figure it out in a hurry, because the tenants and the owners are going to ask you why it isn't, and you better have a good answer. So you have to work collaboratively, and you have to make sure that you're looking at those metrics whenever possible, but getting to site, touching and feeling things goes a long way, and making sure that things are working the way that they should.
No, completely agree. And you know what, speaking of some insight, I think you had a few things that you wanted to share with the audience today, correct?
That's absolutely right. I know one of the questions that we get asked a lot is what kind of strategy are you using with your clients? What kind of strategy are you using with your tenants? How do you can't send out a memo to every single person in the building. So what are you doing to make sure that people know what's happening, or steps that are being taken in their space to make it a safe place for them to return? So I'll share my screen here with a small deck that we've created at Kipling. This one is about 16 pages, and we won't go into every single page, of course. But we've created, some decks like this that are nice, colorful, touch and feel kind of documents that can be shared around the office. As we send these out to our main contacts and encourage them to please, please, please share these with their team so they can get a sense of what's happening and how things are being improved for them. So, at a high level, we're talking about things like the building itself, what's going on with HVAC, what's happening with the building operations staff, have the mechanical systems been updated, access control. Phil, you touched on that very quickly. How do people get in and out of the building? Can you just walk in off the street, or do you need to have a fancy little fob on your key ring to get in past the front door? Our security coming after hours, with buildings being so under occupied, this is a problem for people who are accessing who should not be, or folks who want to take advantage of empty offices and go in and try to clean people out. So having security staff on hand and doing after hours patrols is a big ask, and it's being asked of a lot of my clients right now. We talked about housekeeping, and then at a high level, a guide to reopening. One of the pieces I'll touch on very briefly here, just in the interest of time, is around access control, as well as social distancing and security in public spaces. So as Susan said, the biggest risk for us right now is spreading it from one human to another, not so much of picking up a pen or something that somebody's used after they wipe their nose, although of course these concerns do still exist. But we've had to kind of reinvent the internal office space to make sure that there can be 6 feet of distance between people who used to be kind of desk mates. Elevators have had to reduce their occupancy to 2 or 3 people. There's more cleaners in the building now because of the enhanced cleaning, which is partially offset by lower occupancy. But with security and the other guards that are still there's a number of different things that you have to be kind of juggling all at once. So instead of trying to create, a sort of one-pager memo that can go out, creating decks like these where tenants can look at them and get some ideas of where to start, it just cuts down on the amount of time you have to explain the approach to every single tenant in a 40-plus tenant building. It also gives them a little bit of, they can say, okay, I understand they prepared the team and they've reduced the workforce, they've created a social plan, but talk to me more about reducing the touch points and increasing the cleaning. If it's a tenant who looks after their own in-suite janitorial, they just may want some helpful hints as to where are you focusing on in your spaces. Do you think it's a good idea if I get rid of the coffee machine? So having these kind of, fighting coronavirus abridged documents ready that have a good sort of background of what you've done to date, just make that next conversation so much easier. And it's something I strongly encourage property managers to prepare for their work sites.
I absolutely love this. This is fantastic. That's a great idea. So to summarize a few points and then maybe shift directions a little bit before we close off for today. And again, thank you both for being here so much. Really do appreciate this and the insight that both of you bring to this conversation. So, things are changing. Occupancy in the buildings are changing. We're looking at indoor air quality and the metrics behind it. And there's an educational process. People are learning and they want to be more in the know. They want to be more aware. The filters that we're using at the buildings are being upgraded. The spaces are always changing. We were cramming people in before, and now we're spreading them all apart. And it's pretty funny. Technology is changing because of COVID. And the enhanced cleaning is a big one. And I think occupancy and understanding the occupancy is a huge driver. So with all these different things and all these different things happening, and really, I think one of the underlying tone here is really uncertainty. In your opinions, what do you think is next? How do you see the workplace changing in a post-COVID environment? Susan, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Phil. I think a basic toxicology rule can be relied on here. It's the dose makes the poison. So the key in indoor spaces is to lower the dose. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to bring in more filtration. I think filtration of air is key, be that through improved HVAC efficiencies, innovative technologies that improve the oxygen level of the air and remove toxins that we're breathing, improved ways of social distancing or having more ventilation surrounding the spaces where people are working. I really think the next step is going to be everyone becoming aware of what they're breathing in indoor spaces. Like maybe we're still a few years out, but the wheels have been set in motion. And a key part to this is also, the side of environmental social governance ratings and the climate aspect that we have a commitment under the Paris Agreement to hit 30% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030. A big part of this is our buildings. So I know a lot of the knee-jerk response to coronavirus is just get something in there as quickly as possible. I think webinars and education like this will help people to say, okay, take a step back, slow down, and let's do a little bit of research and education into what is the best solution with all those three items in mind. Like a lot of the commercial air purifiers on the market right now are just big pieces of plastic. Like, I don't know if that's the right way for us to continue to go, but we need to filter the air as it's coming in from outside. To date, most of our air quality research has been done on outdoor air. Like up until the last year and a half, no one's ever thought or spoken about indoor air. So it's really about getting the ventilation inside the building up to the level that is required. And I think that is where the focus is going to be as people become more aware of, just because you can't see it, it can harm you. So I think that's where we'll be going over the next 3 years as everyone learns a little bit more about what they're breathing. And just to finish, like not on a morbid note, but we take 6,000 breaths a day. Like, so we don't think about what we're breathing, even though we're drinking 8 cups of water and we're very focused on what's in the water, but we need to start thinking about what we're breathing into our lungs each day.
Wow. I love all these little tidbits and facts. 6,000 breaths a day. Wow. Powerful information. Thank you, Riley. What are your thoughts? How do you see the workplace changing in a post-COVID environment? I think you're at the forefront of it, really. I mean, you're like at the front lines and you're getting reactions from tenants, property managers, building owners. What do you think is going to happen in the near future?
In the short term, property managers should prepare themselves for just a huge influx of subleasing requests. A lot of businesses have people working at home right now. They're hitting their targets, or they're slightly under, but you can't force everybody to come back until we've got some good solutions in place. Phil, you talked about a post-COVID world. I love the optimism. It's going to be a real push to get everybody there. And as I say, there's office spaces that people are saying we have it, but we don't want it. There's other people who are saying, look, we want space, but we don't need quite as much as we originally thought. So maybe that full floor plate tenant renews and is a half floor plate tenant. One of the things that I think is a great indicator for people, just sort of at 20,000 feet, to if their building is doing something or considering indoor air quality and these other myriad factors that go into making a building a safe place to go, is submissions for things like BOMA BEST. Like if your building has a BOMA BEST certification, then it has submitted indoor air quality testing. And it has done HAZ check, NCheck, risk check, all of these great things that are available in the industry and really drive compliance. So, it doesn't have, being a BOMA Platinum or something is fantastic, but just, speak to your, clients or whomever. This is a great time to drive buy-in to programs like that because of what it says to your tenants and guests when they walk in the door. it's going to tell them that you're taking their life and safety seriously. And, BOMA won't just let you come in and get a pass for hitting the very basics. They have a very intensive list of things, and I've gone through it more times than I care to mention, of all the things that we need to do in order to be considered for that kind of accreditation. That's not to say that a building that doesn't have a BOMA Best certification isn't doing it. It just means that there are a number of checkpoints and verifications done in order to reach that standard. So again, it's a good time to start talking with clients, and if tenants have appetite for it, you can use that as kind of a backup to your ask if you don't want to go hat in hand and say, I think we should try BOMA Best or something like that next year. And again, the hybrid model, at least in the short term, is going to get some people going in. I know for me as a property manager, I haven't really been able to do weeks and weeks of working from home because you have to go to the building and you have to check in on these things. But I do see a push for people who work collaboratively together, accounting, marketing groups, those people that really do need to bounce ideas off of each other, coming back at least 3 days a week, and then having some kind of cyclical schedule where on one week you're in 2 and the other week 3, just to bring in some of those bodies so that the workspace can continue to be utilized. And ultimately the business owners don't feel like they're throwing away a huge amount of money every year on a space that's not being used at all.
Wow. Amazing answer. Thank you, Riley. I completely agree. I mean, I've, just like you, have done my fair share of BOMA Best. And I mean, it's a great tool because, number one, it's something that allows, the people who are visiting the building, the people who are daily there at the building, even building managers and the owners of, or the tenants of the entire building itself, and the workers, the employees of your company, to know that, it's something that you guys take seriously. And there are certain, you're right, you can't, there's no faking a certification. There are a lot of things and reports and things that you have to get certifications like that. So, I mean, it's always a good place to start, because I've always said, if you don't know the right questions to ask, a certification like that will force you to ask the questions that you don't know how to answer, or you don't even know how to ask in the first place, or which ones to answer. So that's a fantastic point. I really do like that. Okay, so we have 3 minutes left, and we have a bunch of questions. A couple are redundant. I think this is a really good question to ask here, and then we can wrap up. I can't believe it's already been an hour. Time just flew by. Okay, so this question is in terms of IAQ metrics. So are we finding the desire for visibility into IAQ metrics is being driven by the tenants or landlords, or both? And what are the considerations in both cases? So essentially, is it really the tenants speaking up and saying, hey, we want this if we're coming back to the office? Or is it the landlords and the owners saying, we need this to get people back? Or, what are the considerations both ways? Susan, what are your thoughts?
I have a feeling that Riley knows a lot more about this than I do.
Well, perhaps, but at the same time, from your perspective, the people calling you saying, when they're calling you, who's calling you? Is it people like Riley saying, my tenants are asking for something like this? Or, is it, someone like Riley saying my owners are asking for something like this? Or are they not saying anything?
We're really focused on the owners, because those are the people who drive the decisions. However, we have a social media campaign that targets tenants. So in that sense, we're kind of a B2B business, but we're also B2B2C, because it will be the tenants who push the envelope. I do think it goes to both sides. And so I'm definitely interested in what Riley has to say about it. But I think as the education piece moves the needle, it will be driven more from the tenants.
That's a great point. I love that. Riley, what are your thoughts? 30 seconds.
I mean, from the outset, clients for sure are driving this bus, right? How can I get people back into my building and breathing air that's safe for them to breathe? It was question number one. In terms of continuing the conversation, there's 2 factors: the level of sophistication of your tenant, and how old is the building. So if the building was built in 2018 or 2019, it's probably not too bad. Your air filtering and things are going to be working really nice. If it's an older building that was built in the 1970s and is full of doctors and medical tenants, they are pretty clever people, and they're going to be saying, well, I think the parts per million are supposed to be X and Y, and pardon me, Susan, I know I'm probably butchering this horribly, but that is going to be where, depending on what the tenants are you have in the building, they may have strenuous asks and, you know, reference things that they say, well, according to this, you're supposed to reach this. So you have to be prepared to have those conversations, and just sitting by and waiting for them to happen doesn't do you any favors.
Riley, Susan, thank you so much for being here on behalf of Peak and the Peak marketing team. Thank you for the Peak marketing team for setting this up. I never knew how much work went into actually creating one of these things. So thank you for everybody. Thank you very much, Susan, Riley, again, for taking time out of your crazy busy schedules to be here with us today. Thank you for all the participants that are on, and we'll see you on the next Peak Power panel discussion.
Thank you
everybody.
very much. It's an absolute pleasure.
Perfect. Thank you.